So welcome, my name is Michael and I work for Zalando for about 5 years now. And I would like you to join me on the journey on discovering the productivity frameworks based on my personal experience. And I would like you also to actively think about how you could implement particular insights from this, because one size doesn't fit all. And this was also my experience of learning by doing and figuring out how to really get into the big performance, but also have much more life. I'm working as a data analyst, and according to some headhunters and recruiters, it might be like a sexy job, at least before the ChatGPT era it used to be. And those of you who are working with data, you are quite aware that it often involves lots of data cleaning and irrelevant tidbits, so actually it might be called as a data janitor. Nevertheless, it's not only about information and data and being actually overloaded by it, but it's also about managing time, expectations, dealing with different people who might be your stakeholders, team colleagues, or the customers. So I would like to start my journey by giving you an invitation to how I started my career. Actually, when I started learning Spanish, I had heard about this phrase, La vida es corta, which means that life is short. And initially what it meant for me was that there is a limited time of how much we could achieve in a given day or a given month or a year. So I will go back to this slide later by the end of the presentation, but I would like just to indicate here that there are different ways of looking at our work. The meta work is all about how we are looking from the higher perspective, flying high, in order to better understand what we are doing, how to consciously aggregate whatever task we have at hand, and later on we will dive deep in the second part of the presentation to particular examples and the framework I have built. So for you, just to bear in mind, it's not like something set in stone, it is just a concept that mentally I try to fit in whenever I have a new idea about the new process, about the new work, how to fit it into a particular field. Initially, when I started my work, I had quite a monolithic approach. I just had my calendar, Outlook, email, to-do list, and basically that was it in my Nokia not so smartphone back then. But it was working well until I realized that there are too many responsibilities to handle and I needed to organize myself. I started to read some literature. Back then, it was quite popular to follow on the 7 Habits of Highly Efficient People by Stephen Covey, and his second habit particularly struck me. It's about starting with the end in mind. If I would like to bring my vision to life, I would need to think backwards, so by inversion, so to say. From that concept, I also like very much the anecdote about the jar. It's about the concept that people were asked to fill the jar with as many sand, stones, and pebbles as possible. But those who started to fill the jar with the sand quickly realized that there is not enough space anymore for the pebbles and for the rocks. On the contrary, the ones who started with the big task represented by the rocks were able to get more pebbles in the jar. The metaphor is also about saying that the sun could be represented by the tedious task that would always find a way between those rocks. So we should always start from them. The next thing I realized was that having only one tool is probably not enough for all the work I need to do. As a person who has a hammer and treating everything as a nail, it might be just too simplistic. Once I had more and more responsibilities, it required me to change a little bit my mindset about how to do the job well. From here, I went to the dualistic concept, where I have learned from Daniel Kahneman and his thinking, fast and slow. The main idea is about having 2 different setups in our brain, which are helping us with those heuristics to make the judgment quickly. So of course our brain is lazy and trying to be efficient, not to spend too much time on decisions which are easy, quite intuitive. But on the other hand, if we are considering something substantial like changing a flat, changing a job, we need to implement system 2, which is about more analytical, in-depth thinking, which requires more resources, attention, and energy. But also, there was another book called Deep Work, which highly influenced me because it is saying essentially about 2 different approaches to the work. There are some tasks that you just might playfully work with and be easily distracted without much worry about the results. Like the person on this picture who is swimming on the surface and could play with the ball, play with other people, and basically they could be easily distracted with no other issues. While the other person who is diving, they need to focus and concentrate on one particular task. So this is a representation of how somehow the work could be different depending on the aspect that you have to focus on. But then I also realized that the focus could be different. So you might have a laser focus, like on this picture that you can only see on the tree and not considering the forest in the background. But you might also widen your aperture and consider also to see the full forest. In my experience, this is when I'm writing an article or a book that I need to have this kind of playful approach to consider multiple options, to find different words, to be also open for exploration of the ideas. But when I'm going to the editing and proofreading, I need to be laser focused and spot mistakes, particular errors. From here, I also have learned about the essay from famous philosopher hacker Paul Graham, who mentioned that whether you are a maker, it makes a difference how much time you have in your calendar to do the job. Because if you're a manager, even if you have 1 hour, you could accomplish quite a lot. However, if you are a maker, 1 hour is not enough even to warm up and start preparing the work you have to do. So on the picture you can see how differently calendars are scheduled and how much different approach both types of people have to the work they have to do. So going from this concept, it was already quite easy for me to understand how to divide my attention and divide the task into different categories. But somehow something was missing because I realized I'm getting tired, I need some more energy or attention for a particular task. So I did an experiment. I combined the deep work and system 2 with shallow work and system 1 to figure out if there are some overlaps and maybe some differences between them. It seemed to me that attention is also needed and could differentiate those different modes, but also the energy. So for example, if I have a task that is quite simple to do, why should I dedicate my precious time during the peak of the day for something that doesn't really matter that much? And I could do it when I'm quite tired and exhausted, like by the end of the day or after lunch, while my stomach is quite full and I cannot think as fast as normal. From here, I went to the matrix grid. Here on the one side, we can see the axis for the attention, which is going from low to high, and the energy also going from low to high. You should consider those fields called as planning, performing, reacting, and preparing just as a kind of catchword, because it might involve particular tasks that are overlapping with each other or also fulfilling each other. But to go into details, I would like to give you some examples on how it works, at least for me. So for preparing, what I would consider are like skimming through the emails, through the notes. Whenever you are tired, you might also organize the files, the data, figure out how to write small notes for yourself. Especially what I like about this mode is to draft documentation, the templates and checklists, because quite often I realize that there is much more that could be done easily and simply. There is a very nice principle from the software engineering called DRY, or don't repeat yourself, which states that you should optimize your work, so whenever you have something that is repeated continuously, why not to make it easier and faster. Then what I will be also recurringly going back to is having a notepad to dump the ideas, because you never know when some great idea will strike you. Let's go then to the second field, which I called as planning. Initially, I already mentioned to plan backwards, and I'm using it especially for bigger projects where I need to divide the work. By outlining the milestones and deadlines, I need to spot what are the bottlenecks. Sometimes it's about having access to particular application or getting the confirmation of a stakeholder. So I cannot really start whenever I want to. I have also to take time in consideration for those kind of roadblocks. Well, with overlaps and bottlenecks, I would also plan how to make my work better and sometimes to marry two of them, or so to say, to kill two birds with one stone. Planning is also for me about scheduling and organizing the work. And here I'm often using the blockers. Firstly, to block my calendar from interruptions. so that nobody else will try to schedule a meeting because they will see in the calendar I'm already booked, even if it's a meeting with myself. But then again, if I have too many meetings, one after another, I might actively, proactively set a blocker between them, so I will still have some time to get the reflections, preparations, or action steps for the meeting. By the same token, I would also recommend to have a flexible schedule. So what I mean by that is not to have everything from the to-do list put on the calendar, because if some emergency will happen, you have to reschedule everything, adding and working a lot with the calendar. It's much more optimal approach to have the to-do list working on the side and just planning for the next two urgent important tasks ahead, while being also flexible. The advantage of it is that whenever you will have some unexpected event or you would like to work on something new, you will always easily find the time in your calendar for that, without the need to reschedule too much. Time managing experts are recommending to have about 60% of your calendar filled, while the rest having free. As I mentioned, you could always set up a blocker for yourself and to prevent other people from stealing your time, but by the same token, you could also use this time more efficiently by managing your calendar consciously. Now, let's go to the third field, which is called performing, and this is about flowing in the zone. So if you are familiar with the concept by Csikszentmihalyi, who mentioned that in order to get into the peak performance, you need to really prepare well, but then you need to have this uninterrupted time in your calendar. If there is any interruption, you might lose the flow and not be in the zone anymore. You could have this focus quite playful, like exploring the ideas. You don't need to be focused on a particular item. Again, if some brilliant idea will come to your mind, which is not related to given product or project you're working on, still worth noting that on the side, because you never know when it might be useful, why it's not recommended to waste time on working on this on the side. Finally, for the performance, I think that it makes sense not to force yourself to focus on the outcome, but if you have multiple sessions that are leading towards the same goal, just to focus on the process, to continue to do for a couple of hours the same work, and the next day to continue, because even if you would reach particular milestone, it might be easier the next day to continue for you with higher motivation that you already went to particular step and you could continue from that on. Let's go now to the fourth field, which is about reacting, because it's more about being in the activity that you are bouncing different tasks at the same time. Batch processing in that case is about combining multiple different tasks in the same time, whether it's the same content or not, it's more about the same context. So like having meetings one after another, or dealing with the emails, or for example, cleaning the data or dumping one after another, you don't need to switch your attention so much, you are still mentally in the same context, and you could do much more in the same time. Then I'm also mentioning here the being on the autopilot mode, where you could implement all the routines I mentioned earlier, like creating the to-do list, checklist, forms, or even agenda. So whenever I have a meeting with a stakeholder, each of them might be quite new to me and in particular job we have to do together. I'm going through the same process again and again. I already know what kind of questions they might have, what is needed. So in the pre-filled document, I could follow up with particular questions and requests, address them up front, and save the time on the meeting to already have something substantial to work on, because it's quite repetitive. Then, what I also like to do in order to have more efficiency here is to follow on the zero inbox strategy for the email. Some people are not recommending to treating the email as a to-do list, but I never have more than 10 emails in my inbox. So for me, it's just an indication of what is still waiting for me to work on, to reply, while all the emails I have sent and I'm waiting for the reply, I'm putting to a start folder so I can quickly find them to do a follow-up again. Finally, I'm also running a to-do list for the background activities I could do while doing something different. So here I'm talking about the controversial idea of multitasking. Of course, if you have an interview for a job and the recruiter will ask you about can you multitask, you need to explain that you could juggle multiple activities at the same time, but of course nobody is recommending that you would multitask at at work because it's bad for your cognitive process and depleting your energy. However, there is also a concept called continuous partial attention, where if you have already automated some part of the work, you could do it while doing something else in the background. So for me, quite often this is that I could listen to some podcast or watch documentary while doing this kind of multi-coding job in the background. At the same time, I could do much more. Even if it's a bit slower, then I would do just one activity at the same time. Together they work in synergy and I could achieve more within the same day. With this matrix grid, all four quadrants are working well with each other. However, something was missing for me. It was like not allowing thinking outside of the box. It led me to the next stage, hexagon concept, by dividing the axis and adding two additional spheres. Of course, it's not only about the work, you have also to find the time for recharging, relaxing, and this is why I also implemented them on my framework. What is the difference between them? Well, looking at the axis, one is more active, another one is more passive, but both of them are influential and substantial for the work you are doing at the higher levels. So maybe let's go now to the recharging. Of course, everybody is recommended to have more bio break during your work, but the purpose of it is not only just to have a break for the rest sake, but also because if you are encountering a particular blockage in your work, you cannot find a solution, you might get a break and get a new brilliant idea how to solve that. Famously, Albert Einstein used to say, why do I find all the best solutions only when I'm shaving? So all the time when you are on break, your mind is not actively working on the solution, like you are taking a shower, you are having a walk, your subconscious mind is still working on the problem that you set up for them. For some people, it works quite well when I have a power nap, or even if I go to sleep to program themselves, that they will think intensely about the problem, and the brain will try to find the answer during the night, and quite often you might be surprised by having the solution the next morning. So this is how Thomas Edison has worked with his naps, but also Salvador Dali, and how a eureka moment has appeared that the person who was enjoying the bath finally found a new solution to his problem. Speaking about the physical activity, it's also about having this diffuse mode for the brain to overcome the so-called Einstellung, which is a German word for thinking so intensively about problem that you cannot think about some other solution. You are so much fixed on one particular way. Lastly, what I have also read about a great idea is to do some cleaning or ordering, so making your body more active, because usually you are working at the desk in very fixed position. So just by doing simple activity as ordering around, you already will have some kind of achievement and have the sense of control, which might again move your brain to also do some active work in the background. From recharging, we could also consider the relaxing, where we don't need so much energy nor attention, but still it could give us great results. Worth mentioning here is to have the breaks planned consciously. If this is a structured break, structured relax, you will avoid the situation where by the end of the day you just fall on this couch as a potato and switch the TV channels or stream on the social media and do nothing that is really supporting your development. This is also because of the strong will muscle gets tired with usage, and by the end of the day we all get into this situation that you will just do whatever goes with the flow because you don't have any more energy to decide about anything. So just by being more proactive and deciding upfront how you will spend the evening, how you will spend the break, you could avoid the situation. Quite helpful here is to rely on the habit. So if you have a habit that is quite easily repeated, you will not fall into this trap. And by having the triggers, my favorite example is of having a bag if you want to go to the gym or to run next to your door. So you don't need to find the excuses that you cannot find your towel or your shoes because everything is ready. And if whenever you want to, you just grab it and you go. Again, I would like to mention here the notepad, because even when you are sleeping, if you are resting, something might come to your mind because of this unconscious work that is done in your brain. And who knows, maybe another solution will be found there. So these are all these 6 skills I had to share, but to make it maybe more poetic, I figure out there is one more thing that I missed. And this is the art of not doing. I came up with this beautiful flower, or looking from different perspectives, you might consider it as an umbrella for different approaches, where you would consider that each of the leaves is supporting each other while everything circles around the not doing. There is probably a truism in saying that you will always be busy. It's just a question of how much relevant or not relevant stuff you will have. And it's up to you to decide what truly matters. So there is a famous Eisenhower matrix about dividing the priorities into the urgent and important stuff. So of course you shouldn't focus too much on the not important, not urgent, but some managers might disagree because they would like to give you some requests and you have to do that. Well, it's not always true, and actually in my last feedback I was also having a recognition for figuring out how to not reinvent the wheel, but rather to reuse the old solution. Quite often stakeholders are not aware, not so technical about what already worked or didn't work. So they are asking, by stating a request, they are asking about your opinion. It's not about you have to blindly follow what we want. It's more about testing a solution and figuring out you are the expert on the matter. You might advise better on what could be achieved. Otherwise, you might also delegate to a person who is more skilled on that, or maybe have more time, postpone, or actually ignore. Sometimes happens that the stakeholder doesn't really care that much, they just want to dump some ideas on you, and maybe you will pick it up, maybe not. Sometimes it's up to them to follow up on the topic, since they care more about it. So lastly, I would encourage you also to actively ask about the request, what this is about, and if there is any other way that it could be done. And to sum up this particular stage, I would like to refer you to the poem from the Principles of Python. Now is better than never, or never is often better than right now. And this concludes my presentation about all those different frameworks. Some of these ideas might not work for you, but feel free to pick up what works for you the best and what makes the most sense. And also, it's not like fixed in stone. You could change with time by learning some new responsibilities, by figuring out what is changing. Then I promised you also to go back to a particular slide, which I started this journey with. So the full phrase is La vida es corta pero ancha, which means life is short but wide. And for me, what it means is that many things could happen in parallel. So I could work on different tasks in the same time while starting something and continuously working on that from the other lane at different speed. So this is also how I'm approaching reading the books. Some people cannot really find the time. For me, it's whenever I'm waiting in the queue in the supermarket, I have a book at my hand, I could also read some pages during that time. There are some recommendations for you as well for the next year. If you are reading like one book per month, some of those books might take actually more time, but I would also like to invite you for the training that I will be next quarter with my colleague from Talent Acquisition, Claudia. It's about managing personal energy and vitality. It's in 4 different sessions, so January, February, March, and April. You will find the sign up for that workday. Before we go to the questions, I would also like to share with you a very simplified workflow, the algorithm I made based on these different ideas here, so how to deal with the task, what to do with that and when. And by scanning the QR code, you might go into even more details from my article and to get to this workflow as well. So this is all from my presentation. I'm open for your questions now, and if you don't have any, I'm also open to be approached later in the foyer. And for now, I also wish you happy metawork.